This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
And after a stretch that saw the Rangers lose 6 out of 7 against AL West opponents, the club has all of a sudden won 5 in a row. And we'll get into this, Evan's version of small ball. And they're right back in there, a couple games behind the Mariners.
Yeah. They are, as we record this on Wednesday, they're a game under 500 going into the series finale with St. Louis. And even with a depleted lineup and playing basically 500 baseball over the last month, John, sit here, they are the number 3 wild card team in the American League West, or in the American League, and they could get some reinforcements back for the before the next homestand ends, with Wyatt Langford and Corey Seager both in their rehab assignments with AA Frisco this week.
And that's a short homestand, just a 3-game set with the Cleveland Guardians, who are currently leading the American League Central. And then they'll go back out on the road. Evan, you're getting a lot of miles this month because the club plays only 9 of 27 games at Globe Life Field.
Yeah, I can't remember a stretch, John, where they've had this many road games, this 2-to-1 road to home ratio for a full month. And it's also a reunion month for Skip Schumacher, who got greeted very warmly in St. Louis here. We'll see how the reception is in Miami when the Rangers go there at the end of the month. I wrote a column about that if anybody's interested. Our guest this week is going to be Rangers Hall of Famer Buddy Bell. He was one of the team's first stars, played 8 years in Texas, a 4-time All-Star, and won 6 Gold Gloves at third base.
And on the archives in Arlington, we're going to kind of get Buddy involved in that a little bit, because we're going to talk about Rangers who've had 200 hits in a season. And Buddy was the first in 1979, and Rangers haven't had one since 2011 with Michael Young. And I guess the question is 200 hits still a milestone that's important in the big leagues? But we'll get to that in the archives in Arlington.
Why does Michael Young always find his way into our podcast, John?
Because he's all over Rangers history in the archives. So
I guess I have to just deal with that. Anyway, you can reach out to us on X with any Rangers questions or comments. I'm at Evan_P_Grant. And he is, as always, at Ranger Blake.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
Well, a week ago, Evan, as we talk about the season, it was really all doom and gloom. The Rangers were coming off a sweep in Anaheim, and then obviously no hit by the Astros on Memorial Day, and then they did win one game, which they managed to, but the last 2 games of that series weren't very good. But all of a sudden here, going, as you say, into the finale of the road trip in St. Louis, it's a different team, and they're playing small ball, they're executing it, but does it really start with Jock Peterson at the top of the lineup?
Well, I thought Tuesday night Skip Schumacher had a great quote after the game. He said that he thinks Jock feels dangerous again, and I had a little bit of fun with that. But look, he's been a revelation at the top of the lineup, and it's allowed them to move Brandon Nimmo, their most consistent hitter, for much of the year, with the exception of Josh Young, down into more of a run-producing spot. And Jock knows what to do in the leadoff spot. He's had more at-bats in the leadoff spot than any place else in a lineup in his major league career. As we record this, he's led off 15 games now, and he has reached, as the leadoff batter in that game, 7 times, a .467 on-base percentage as the first batter of the game, which is a great way to start rallies. And I do think that, listen, all the things that the Rangers wanted to sign Jock Peterson for, slugging, having a little bit of an edge, all that stuff has come back into play now. When he is contributing, he's a completely different personality than he was for the first half of last year. When the Rangers are playing more fundamental baseball, I know that the term everybody likes to use is small ball, but look, it's not just bunts and it's not just stolen bases. I think over this 5-game winning streak, I went back and looked this up this morning. They have a 28.5 line drive percentage. It's up about a third, up about 33% over what it was for the first 55 games of the year. They're hitting line drives. Jock is hitting line drives. They are getting productive outs. Jock is a guy who's willing to move runners in the leadoff spot. And I think it's gotten more and more buy-in from everybody as this little stretch has gone on.
And Ezekiel Duran keeps producing. I mean, right now the Rangers, with the injuries and everything, up the middle, it's, Nicky Lopez at second, for the most part. I guess Foscue plays against lefties. And then Duran has played a great shortstop. And he brings more, he has brought a lot of life to this lineup as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can see that Zeke has always been a high energy guy, but you can also see he's now a high energy, confident guy. And I think that makes a difference. Credit to Skip Schumacher for giving him more of a role and more of a chance. Credit to Zeke for taking it. Credit to the Rangers coaching staff for finding a guy in Alex Centrone who really has bonded with Zeke well. And so you've gotten a level player that you hoped you would get when you traded for him in 2021, but haven't really seen vestiges of since the 2023 season.
And the Rangers are in a position now, Evan, that Wyatt Langford and Corey Seager are out on rehab assignment in Frisco this week. When could we see them back in the lineup? And we know Seager will go back in, but it poses an interesting dilemma in the outfield and how Skip Schumacher may use that outfield combination once Langford gets back.
Yeah, and I do think that Langford will be on rehab a little bit longer than Seager will. I think Seager will be back in the lineup probably on Friday or Saturday, and Langford may not make it back until Kansas City next week. But I do think it poses some questions for the Rangers because offensively, Alejandro Osuna has been really good at the execution in this small ball offense. Now, he's not slugging at all. His slugging percentage is under 300, but he's had a 380 on-base percentage in this role. He's handled the bat really well. You've got Evan Carter, who has really struggled over the last month in center field. He's an elite defender, and he's saved a number of runs in center field, and I think in any defensive metric that you go to find, Evan is among the 5 best defensive center fielders in the league. If you go a little bit deeper into his numbers, John, he is at least kind of holding his own against right-handed pitching, and that is the role for success for Evan Carter. So I think the challenge for Skip Schumacher is going to be when you get Wyatt Langford back, how do you figure out ways to get Evan Carter going? How do you figure out ways to keep Alejandro Osuna involved? Because I think that defense is really, really valuable to the Rangers. I think the Rangers still believe that even though they're both 23, I think the Rangers believe that Evan Carter is the better baseball player. But I think right now, Alejandro Osuna is playing baseball better. And that's something that the Rangers have to sort through. And I don't know that they've got a uniform answer at this moment.
Well, let's turn to the pitching for a little bit. And the rotation, has had its ups and downs a little bit. But, again, they had 28 consecutive scoreless innings before the Cardinals scored off Nathan Eovaldi on Tuesday night. And it just seems like if they can score enough runs, those starters are gonna keep them in the game.
Again, John, I keep pointing to this stat, and to me, it's just absolutely amazing that if the Rangers can score first in a game and get themselves to at least 4 runs in that game, they are 19-1 this year. Scoring first gives the pitching staff a little bit more room for error, and getting to 4 runs is a testament to how good the overall pitching staff has been. So that 19-1 record, everybody is going to be pretty good, actually very good, when they score first and get to at least 4 runs. But the Rangers' winning percentage is the best in the big leagues in that under those parameters. And so that's why I think this pressure offense early makes a lot of sense. And I do think it makes the pitching staff much more able to not have to be perfect. Now, last night we saw Eovaldi give up runs in the 7th inning, and there was some question about whether or not he could have been pulled earlier in that inning. I think this was a case of when you're managing a club that's on a winning streak, there are all sorts of challenges that come up, and that is to extend the winning streak. Sometimes you're using your bullpen a lot, and the Rangers had a really depleted bullpen yesterday. So Jalen Beeks got thrust into a really tough situation with 2 guys on, a tie game, and nobody out. And look, he hasn't been the best in the big leagues at inherited runners, but he did a tremendous job last night.
Outstanding.
To get out of the 7th inning, giving the Rangers 2 outs into the 8th, and making it a situation that could be managed. And again, when you score runs, there's ways to manage even difficult circumstances.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit, Cal Quantrill coming in after Beeks, certainly not a role that he's accustomed to doing, but it kind of goes back to your point then, when you score the runs, you do, and that way at a 3-run lead, you have a little more flexibility there to use a guy like Quantrill when the rest of the bullpen is shot a little bit.
Right, and you got Quantrill to get you through that last out in the 8th inning. They score the 3 runs in the 9th inning. They've got 1 bullet to play in Jacob Junis, who hadn't pitched, who was the one semi-rested guy at the back end of the defense, and worked out perfectly for the Rangers. So again, that was a fun game to watch them play. It's a fun game to cover, and they played championship quality baseball last night.
And we like that, and it's good when the Rangers are having fun, Evan, because I think you have a little more fun with the job then too. So it's nice to see that, because we don't always see that. And
look, I love my job. It's frustrating sometimes when you watch the same game over and over again, and it's just like this futility. And I know how fans feel about it. I get it, but it's been fun to watch this style of play where they're actually putting pressure on opponents and creating run scoring opportunities.
Well, we'll see what happens if they can continue it here and come home. And again, they're playing a tough Guardians team, and then they've got the Padres coming soon, and so they've got some tough teams coming up. But our guest on this week's podcast is Buddy Bell. I think one of the underrated third basemen in Major League history, and he played 18 years. He played 8 with the Rangers. Ranger Hall of Famer, went on to a career as a manager and club executive. And we'll talk to Buddy next. Well, our guest on this week's Sports Day Rangers podcast is a familiar name to Ranger fans. 2004 inductee into the Rangers Hall of Fame, Buddy Bell, played 18 years in the major leagues from 1972 to 1989 with 4 teams, a 66.4 career WAR in over 2,400 games. He probably doesn't know this, but he's exactly 100th all-time in hits at 2,514, although Freddie Freeman is closing in on that. 5-time All-Star, won 6 straight Gold Gloves with the Rangers from 1979 to 1984. 3-time Ranger Player of the Year, went on to manage the Tigers, Rockies, and Royals. Long-time executive with both the White Sox and the Reds. And we'll get into it. Didn't quite happen with the Rangers. And then obviously from a baseball family, his father and 2 sons both played in the major leagues, and his son David managed the Cincinnati Reds. Buddy, welcome to Sports Day Rangers.
It's nice to be with you guys. It's nice to see you, John, as always. Nice to meet Chris and see Evan again.
So me being the historian of the Rangers, and so I'm going to go back and start from the beginning. So back in the 1980s, and I got to the Rangers in 1984, and you were at the time when I came in as the PR director. You were certainly by far and away the star of that team, and we had good players, but you had won 6 straight Gold Gloves. You'd gone to the 4 All-Star games pretty much as the Rangers' only representative each year. And I remember, late in that span, we all know Eddie Childs being the owner at the time in the oil business. Well, that cratered, and he didn't have any money. And it really obviously affected the team. So what are your, you had great years there. I know. Were those some of the better years of your career, though, just playing in Texas? And then, the frustration, obviously, I'm sure, started to build.
Yeah, well, just let me get this out of the way first. I wouldn't really change any year that I had with any club. I'm certainly, coming up with Cleveland, ending my career basically with Cincinnati, Houston, and then coming back with Texas in '89, which I probably should have never done. But in saying all that, though, Texas was the place that I remember the most. That's the place that, and my kids grew up there. Everything about it is what I needed at the time. I loved Cleveland, but we weren't very good there either. We had the same issues in Cleveland as we had in Texas. We were talking earlier about the money that wasn't being spent. I just, there's such confusion over the ownership at the time of Texas. When I got there, Brad owned the club, and he was only there, I think, for about a year maybe after I got there, and then Eddie took over and tried to kind of figure things out. But as you mentioned before, John, the oil industry went kind of in the tank at that time, so. We just really had a rough time, trying to put some money together, trying to get it organized. There were some GM issues and things like that. Tag eventually took over, which was a brilliant move. I can't even remember who made him the GM, but now it's one of the crown jewels of Major League Baseball. And at the time when I got to Texas, that people really didn't know much about us. It will always be a football town, I think, but things are certainly changing in Texas, and that wasn't the case when I first got there.
But the teammates, you had some great guys, and it was a great group of guys. And unfortunately, we had really good. And again, the West Division at that time was 7 teams, and it was playoffs were different, and we had good and bad years. But I'm sure the memories are, like you say, growing up there were, your kids grew up, you played there and everything. And
we had great teammates. You had mentioned earlier that I might have been the best player on the team. That probably wasn't the best thing. We probably needed more than me, somebody that could really impact the ball game, like more of a power hitter type thing. We had LP there for a while who did some nice things, but overall, we just really didn't. We really didn't have anybody that could really carry a club for a week or two, and again, that put a lot of pressure on me, and I didn't really realize it at the time. I just sort of played and things like that, but and our pitching wasn't great, but in the ballpark was. I loved that ballpark. It's not a great ballpark to hit in, but the fans were close. You kind of knew everybody. You walk out of the dugout and say hello to this guy or this guy, the first or second row. So it was, that has changed a little bit. But I love Texas, and I always wanted to end my career there. That never happened.
Well, you kind of did, but it's.
But
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But even my executive career, I really, my preference was to end it in Texas at some time because I always wanted to go back and enjoy the good times that you guys have had recently.
So that I just want to talk a little bit about that. So you get traded in '85 to the Reds, your hometown team and everything, and went on and had some pretty good seasons. You come back to Texas. You signed for the '89 season, and we were kind of gearing up then. We'd signed Nolan Ryan. We traded for Julio Franco and Rafael Palmeiro. We had pretty good young pitching, and '89 turned out to be a pretty good year for the Rangers, although you didn't get to experience a lot of it because of the injuries and everything. But did you see kind of the tide turning there? The ownership had changed in March of that year to the George Bush, Rusty Rose group. Did you see kind of that they were trying to move ahead here?
Absolutely. And, they had Buick there, who was a really good player, who's really underrated as far as I'm Bichelle. And then they had a lot of Rafi who came over, Pudge and Gonzo were coming up, one. So I knew what was going on, and that's one of the reasons, when I talked to Tag about coming over there, I knew I wasn't going to play all the time. The problem was I just couldn't, my body just wouldn't, just wouldn't get it done. I wasn't able to do anything that I was able to do in the past. But all those young players really had successful careers, and they did a great job. And then the World Series, Johnny led to the World Series. I know that was a killer of the St. Louis game. So yeah, I mean, I came over with the idea. I was going to go to the White Sox. Before that, I had talked. Jeff Torborg wanted me to go over with the White Sox because Robin Ventura was coming up, and he wanted me to sort of mentor Robin. Robin never really needed a mentor, as far as I was concerned. And then Tag was talking about the same thing with Boo, when Boo was over here, kind of helping him. I played a little first base, but quite frankly, I just couldn't move anything. It was just really way too frustrating for me. But I love being back. It was one of those things.
What was, the early '80s obviously predate me as a Ranger presence, but it was such a foreign kind of entity at that point in time because we didn't have ESPN in Atlanta showing games every night. And it always seemed like the only headlines we saw about the Rangers, and this predates you a little bit, were always something wacky. And that was the late '70s. You get there in the early '80s, at the end of the '70s. What was the organization like? I mean, did you?
It was
feel
still
like
wacky in the '80s, Evan. Come on, it was a.
Did you feel like you were playing for a major league organization, or did it feel like it was kind of a circus sometimes?
Well, it was a bit of a. It was a bit of a circus for sure. Don knows as much as I do about that stuff. Honestly, I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I was always just happy being in the big leagues. I was happy being given the opportunity to win or lose a game on a particular night. I loved most of my teammates. The teammates I had, Mickey Rivers, Scoop, Al Oliver. I mean, Mickey Rivers was one of the greatest teammates I've ever had in my life. I mean, just a pleasant human being. I mean, like us all, we all have a few warts, we get along the way, but, but he's great to me. Jim Sundberg's always been the best player I've ever played with in terms of toughness and in terms of being intelligent and being a great teammate. Toby Hare. I mean, I could go on and on about the guys I played with there. So my dad always used to tell me, he said, buddy, you're not gonna really remember a ton of games that you played, but you will remember the people that you played with and the people that you worked with, the cops, the ushers, people in the secretaries. I mean, it was just, I know things are a little bit different now. It's a little bigger. It's very corporate now. Back in the day, I don't know how many guys you had in your office, John, but it wasn't very many.
It was about 30. It was really small, yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't, in Cleveland, we only had like 6 or 7. I mean, we had a secretary that worked for Phil and Gabe, and then so it was. I don't know. We just kind of got used to all that kind of stuff, and ballparks I played in weren't great. Municipal Stadium or Arlington Stadium, but I loved all of them. I didn't like hitting in either one of them, but I didn't think about that until after I was done, really.
So you did play in an era of, and I mentioned your WAR, which is over 66, Evan, and it was a great era.
John, I went back and looked, and Buddy still got the 4th best WAR in Rangers history, and I know back in the 80s, Buddy was calculating what his career WAR was, but yeah, it's Pudge, Rafael Palmeiro, and Adrian Beltre are the only guys that have a higher WAR in Ranger history than Buddy did.
And it was an era of great third basemen too, right? I mean, it was Nettles and Schmidt, and so guys that aren't Nettles in the Hall of Fame, and it's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame. Hopefully, we'll get there one of these days. Way ahead of me here. But I don't know. I don't know if other guys think about the Hall of Fame when they're playing, but I don't. That's something I really don't think about. But anyway, but I'm happy with my career, and I'm retired and doing nothing, chasing my grandkids around.
Buddy, you mentioned that the game is more corporate today, and John mentioned your WAR, and I think both of those things evaluate players and the way we do things in the game, and how many minds and collective units are involved in making decisions has changed. Has it changed for the better?
Well, that's a great question, Evan. I always will think the game's so much stronger than the people that work inside of it. I just think it's just the strength that the game has is always gonna be what pulls us forward. However, I do think that I'll tell you a little story. When I was with the Reds, and I love being back home for sure. I didn't necessarily like working for the Reds. It was kind of an awkward situation anyway, with my son there and me there, and so it was a bit awkward from that standpoint. But I got to the point where, to be relevant in this game, you got to do some crazy. You got to be somewhat superficial and things like that. You just got to kind of deal with some things you don't want to listen to, and you got some people that are in this game that really have no idea what they're talking about. And quite frankly, I kind of got sick of it, but I think as an older guy, I think it's kind of the way we are anyway. We get a little grumpy, and we get a little full of ourselves and think about what we did in the game. And the game's changed a little bit. But I will tell you that I think the players are better now than they ever have, and there's a reason for that. And I think the coaches have a lot to do with it. I think the strength and conditioning programs that they have now have a lot to do with it, and I think the front offices do as well, because they use all the good organizations using analytics to their advantage. They don't use it as an end all. They use it as a confirmation, more or less. They use it for what their eyes are actually telling them. At the end of my executive career, I never let my eyes determine exactly what I was looking at. I always went to the analytics to really confirm what I'm looking at. And I think if you can sort of combine that, with the analytics and the older minds, the wisdom, but nobody's really been able to do that, with the exception of, I look at all these other organizations as well in other sports, like the Spurs, like the Steelers. That those people I think use it, and I'm sure the Dodgers are. Of course, they got so much money. They can withstand some mistakes. None of the other guys can't. We can't withstand injuries. We can't. That affects everything. But when you're dealing with the Dodgers and the Yankees and things like that, they're able to make some mistakes. But the other group of teams, just can't afford to do that. And they have a lot of these smart kids that really have a passion for the game, and then that I think eventually the game will pay off having them around. But they have to listen to some of us old guys that have an idea or have a feel. I'm not saying they don't have a feel, but I think sometimes they don't really maybe listen as much as they should.
I've definitely earned my old guy card of the past few months as I've continued to campaign for the Rangers to play. I don't like calling it small ball anymore. I just like to consider it fundamental baseball. But over this little 5-game winning streak the Rangers had as we recorded this, I mean, they've bunted, they've moved runners, and they've hit line drives instead of just focusing on high launch angles, and it's producing runs. And it seems like everything that's old is new again.
Well, that's a great point, Evan. And I tell you what, a lot of these organizations, a lot of these minor league development, the organizations are going back. They're making their kids bunt. They're stealing bases. They're positioning is important. All the things that we sort of just took for granted because it was drilled into us when we were in the minor leagues before we got to the big leagues. Now I think it's sort of gotten back to that a little more. I've always been old school, but I've always been somebody that, wants to put the player in the best possible position to succeed. And a lot of these guys can even bunt. And the managers are getting hammered because they don't bunt in certain situations. But it's worse when you ask somebody to bunt who can't bunt. So there's a lot of things that, as a coach and a manager, during the course of a game where situationally some guys just can't do it. So you have to be smart about that. But I think the kids are starting to get it a little bit. And a lot of it has, I'm not a big, I love college baseball. I love college basketball more than college baseball. I'm not a huge fan. It's so long. I love watching the games, but to get into the end of it is really hard. But these kids are starting to bunt. They're starting to, hit the cutoff man and things like that. So, and a lot of these kids are going to college now because of the NIL. I'm not a big fan of that either. But I think a lot of the fundamentals that are kind of happening in the big leagues now are really, quite frankly, because of the college game. I think there's a lot of bunting. There's a lot of running. And there's a lot of kids coming out of college right into the major leagues. So, I mean, you see the kid in Cleveland, Bastano, or I think his name is. So there's a lot of hot. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and I think that's why, some the game in the big leagues is sort of moving to. I don't ever think it'll go back to where it was in 1980, but at least you can kind of think along with the game nowadays.
Yeah, it's just been weird the last 5 games to watch them actually put pressure on defenses and move runners and see the outcome of that after watching for the last 2.5 years, everybody trying to just slug, and the games have become somewhat unenjoyable just to watch. Even as an observer, they just become unenjoyable because there's so little contact and so little capitalization on run scoring opportunities.
You know what? I was going to say something else, and just kind of reminded me that when you were talking that, there's a lot of kids that can run now. They're more athletic. I think I don't think they run the bases as well as they did maybe 30 years ago, but they're starting to figure that out too. But it seems like guys are more athletic. They run more. Back in the day, you probably had 3 or 4 guys that could run maybe on your club, but now, most of these kids can run a little bit, and they're athletic, and So I think that goes with the strength and conditioning as well. I mean, they're able to jump on things that kids need to get better at, and they're doing a really good job of it.
So, buddy, that brings me to this question. At one point in time, you would have had a hand in player development in this organization. Let's go back. I think it was after the 2011 season. The Rangers had just won the American League and obviously lost the World Series in dramatic fashion here in St. Louis. But the Rangers were seeing a little bit of a divide open up in the front office, and they were looking for a new player development man. And can you pick that up? You were, I think, with the White Sox at that point in time, right? And the Rangers, John Daniels and Nolan Ryan spoke to you about joining this club.
Yeah, I had, I heard Scotty was going to move on, and
Scott
Scotty
Service, yeah. Scott Service went to the Angels. Yep.
Right, and he went with Dipoto there, right?
Yeah, he went assistant GM. Yep.
But I heard, Scotty was going to take off, and I had, like I said before, I've always sort of wanted to do something in the Rangers organization. And I had heard this, and I went to Jerry. I went to Jerry Reinsdorf, who's a great friend of mine, and he didn't want me to do it. Eventually, the Rangers asked for permission. Jerry denied it, and I went back to him, and then I talked to John and Nolan, and I thought it was going to get done. I don't really know exactly what happened, because it was none of my business, really. I mean, it just didn't work out. And even then, because of my relationship with the White Sox and with Jerry, I was sort of in between as well. No, thinking it when I was able to go back, even if this didn't work out. But, I was hoping this would work out, and it never did. But it worked out well. I stayed with the White Sox. I love my years with the White Sox. And, but I would have really liked been a Ranger again.
It would have maybe changed a few things too, because and we're not going to get into this today, but we hired Tim Popora. That creates a little bit of a fission, I guess, in the organization, and what happens. So I know some of us were hoping very hard you would take that job. But
I love player development. People ask me all the time, what, did I like managing or did I like player development? And my answer to them was when I was managing, I always thought about player development. I was in player development. I never thought about managing.
Yeah.
So I love. There's nothing like a player progress and get to the big leagues and be successful, because you feel like you've had something to do with that. And I got more out of that than even when I played. So that was a tremendous part of my life. For sure.
So that's the last one for me, Evan. I'm just going to bring, because Buddy came back to Arlington last year in 25. We gave him his Hall of Fame jacket, and I remember you wanting to go down to the clubhouse and talk to some of the guys you'd had as a player development director with the White Sox. And it was just, for me, watching Marcus Semien and Jake Berger especially come up, and just that relationship, and they were so happy to see Buddy. It just kind of accentuates what you're saying, how important, how great it was.
Yeah, it was so great to see Marcus, and hope he does well with the Mets. And Jake was with us with the White Sox. Jake and I have something in common. Jake has a Down syndrome daughter, and I do as well. And he does an unbelievable job with this Down syndrome association. It's called Gigi's. He's a great young man. So yeah, it's always nice to see these guys, and not only because when I know they weren't married, they were just trying to make ends meet. They were making like $1,200 a month, can hardly pay for their rent, things like that. But it's when you see them growing up and they have families and the way they are around their families, there's nothing else like that. That is for sure.
Well,
Yeah,
this has been great going back and everything. And like I said, when I got to the Rangers, Buddy is the guy, and it was really kind of true. The fans, he was a fan favorite, and it's been fun watching him his whole career. And now we're both pretty old, so it's just. But we appreciate the time today on the podcast.
Well, thank you. It was great to be on with you guys, and I'm really, really proud to be a little part of this organization.
Buddy,
Appreciate
thanks for being on, and thanks for being on also because it gives me another opportunity to feel like the young guy on this podcast, even as I enter my 60s. And was reminded last night when I walked into the clubhouse in St. Louis. One of the guys said to me, "Oh, you're still around?" That's always a good feeling.
That's a compliment, by the way. That's a compliment.
I'll take it that way.
Well, Buddy Bell was great. So many stories. He covers so much ground there, Evan. And talking about today's game versus the past, it was kind of interesting, some of the things he had to say.
Yeah, it was a great interview. And, that early 80s period, because the Rangers were just such a forgettable team, it's hard for me to really wrap my arms around what that experience was like.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what it was like. I have one Buddy Bell story, and then we'll go to 200 hits in the archives in Arlington. So I came down to be interviewed by the Rangers. I may have told this story before. In early September 1984. I was with the Orioles. They'd given me permission to come down and interview for the Rangers for the PR job. And I remember getting to DFW, and Jim Reeves had broken the story that Joe Klein, who was a general manager at the time, was getting ready to be fired. And so I went over. I was in the middle of this. I never talked to Joe. I talked to Mike Stone, the president, Larry Schmittou, the marketing VP. And we did the interview and everything. They said, well, do you want to come to the game tonight? The Rangers were playing, I think it was Milwaukee. And I said, you guys do not want me there. You've got enough going on with this whole thing, because I hadn't announced it. And it was a typical Ranger circus and everything. So I did not go to the game on that. I think it was a Friday night. And I watched the game on television, and the Rangers were having a horrible season in '84. But they came back, and Buddy hit a walk-off grand slam against Pete Ladd. And I remember that from that night. They offered me the job on a Saturday morning. Right after that, they had the press conference where they announced Tom Grieve as the new general manager. But again, I should have known, at the time, the Rangers, it's always something with the team. And mentioning Buddy, we're going to talk about 200 hits because this is very relevant for Buddy. Buddy Bell was the first Ranger to ever have 200 hits in a season. 1979, he had exactly 200. The next year, the Rangers had both Mickey Rivers and Al Oliver had over 200 hits. Rivers had 210, which was the record until Michael Young came along. And then fast forward to 1991, the Rangers are one of the few teams in Major League history to have 1 year with 3 guys with 200 hits. Rafael Palmeiro and Ruben Sierra had 203 each. Julio Franco had 201. He won the batting title that year. And then obviously you go to Michael Young, who the Rangers have had 13 200-hit seasons, Evan. Michael has 6 of them, including the top 4 all-time totals. And Michael was the last Ranger to have 200 hits in a season in 211, his 6th and final time that he had over 200 hits. And I went ahead and looked a little bit from 2012 to 2025 to how many guys had 200 hits in a season. It's only happened 21 times. Jose Altuve has 4 of those. D. Gordon has a couple. Luis Arraez has a couple. Bobby Witt was the last with 200 hits Bobby Witt Jr. in 2024. The leader last year was Witt with 184. There were only 3 guys that had 180 hits. So I guess the question is Is 200 hits still a barometer, or is it something that with the way the game is played these days, we're going to see fewer and fewer guys post 200 hit season?
Well, I mean, as I sit here today, my perspective is that hitting is going to matter again. We've spent so much time looking at OBP and slug and OPS and far less time looking at batting average. But guys who put the ball in play, I think, are going to become more valuable again. And so is the 200 hit plateau going to be more common? I don't think so, but I think we will see, some 200 hit seasons. The other challenge in all of this, John, right, is you've got more workload management in baseball than ever before. And so guys, on the whole, play fewer games.
Right, not getting the at-bats. Yep.
Yeah, but I do think that we're going to trend more in the direction of line drive hitting and gap hitting. And I do think that's going to present the opportunity for a few more guys to pile up 200 hit seasons.
And I got kudos to Michael Young. It just goes to show Michael played every day. He was very durable, but having 200 hits 6 times in a season in the last 25 years, I guess, it's still a pretty remarkable accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are 13, as you said, there are 13 2,000 hit seasons in Rangers history. Michael's the only one with more than one to his name. And to do that for 6 years in a 9-year period is just amazing. And again, Michael was in an era where the walk might have been more valued than the single.
Right.
And so he was almost dinged for being a good hitter. But Michael Young was an exceptional hitter who had a great idea of what to do in the situation. He was more than willing to go the opposite way. And I think that's something else that hitters are going to have to start being willing to do again, to take advantage of defensive faux shifts. And so I think maybe there will be some pretty cerebral guys who have hitting talent who will start to take advantage of that.
Well, there's our accolades for Michael Young of the Week. It seems to happen at least once a month, but always justified in my mind. So with that, we will thank you for joining this week's episode of Sports Day Rangers.
When are we getting the Michael Young statue, John? When is Michael Young's statue going to be unveiled?
We just did a statue last year. You see the 3 statues we did, they have one thing in common. We'll see what happens, but I think it was important to take care of the National Baseball Hall of Famers.
Build Michael a statue.
Okay. Well, again, we thank Buddy Bell for joining us on this week's podcast. And Evan, you got anything else? You've had any thing going on in St. Louis or anything?
No, I've done my job. I've made you feel uncomfortable and awkward, and so I feel like I've accomplished something for the day. And you can send all those tweets to build Michael a statue to @RangerBlake at twitter.com or x.com or whatever it is.
So remember, follow Evan's innovative to follow Evan's innovative content at the Dallas Morning News, and we'll talk to you all next week.